It's just us today. Good morning. Good to see everybody. Apologies for being a few minutes late. Fridays we have meeting with the Senate President and I can't really leave. So we are here today with Senate Budget and Taxation, Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment Subcommittee. Thank you. To hear 4 budgets: Maryland Environmental Service, Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, Office of the State Prosecutor, and the Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operation Fund. We are going to go in that order. So let's start with MES, and I'm going to ask our analyst, Carrie Cook, to kick us off. Carrie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Carrie Cook presenting the budget for the Maryland Environmental Service. On page 1, you'll just see a summary table here that shows the total assets over the total liabilities, as well as revenues over expenditures from FY 2019 to 2023. You can see that they had a net operating income of $198,000 in fiscal 2023. Exhibit 1 on page 3 shows MES's revenue by fund source for FY 2023. So MES does projects for other state agencies as well as local clients and a few private clients as well. Exhibit 2 on page 4 is revenue by business activity type. So these are the types of projects that MES undertakes. You can see very little change from last year here. We have dredging as a large portion of their revenue, in addition to water and wastewater and recycling. On page 6, exhibit 4 is their operating expenses. So you can see here some changes that are probably going to mirror many of the other agencies. They have substantial increases in personnel costs. MES, while they are independent and have independent authority over their personnel, they do mirror the state in terms of cost of living adjustments and increments. And that's just to, keep themselves competitive and retain their workforce. They also had increases in fuel and utilities for inflation and market factors, as well as contracts. Exhibit 5 on page 7 is the operating expenses for reimbursable projects only. So this is the portion of the projects that MES performs for the state in terms of operating water and wastewater facilities. Exhibit 6 on page 8 is a breakout of which agency MES is performing these projects for. Again, this is all water and wastewater operations and maintenance. So you can see here that the majority is public safety and corrections. So MES is operating those facilities at the correctional institutes across the state. They also do a substantial amount of work for the Park Service and for juvenile services. Exhibit 7 on page 9 is a new addition to the analysis this year. So this is showing the contractual projects. So these are the projects that are not under that BPW directive where MES needs to operate water and wastewater facilities, but are rather the additional projects such as the dredging at the port and the reuse of those dredge materials that MES is doing. So you can see here that the port is a large portion of this, as well as corrections and state highway. So this is covering, this combined with the reimbursable projects is covering all the projects that MES is doing for state agencies. MES also does contractual projects for local governments, which is not included here. Moving on to page 10. Personnel, just with the caveat that MES does have independent authority over their personnel and they're not subject to DBM oversight. I did just want to highlight their vacancy rate, which as of yesterday, I think is 3.7%, which is quite good, well under the state average, which is hovering around 10%, I believe. And it's also under their budgeted rate, which is 5%. So MES has done a lot of initiatives in terms of recruiting and retaining. So just wanted to give them a shout out there. And then on to the last section, which is the issue section of the analysis, beginning on page 11. Just wanted to do a little bit of follow up on Back River, which we talked about at length in last year's hearing. So the first section just has a summary of when MES personnel were at the plant, which was roughly from March through December 2022, and the work that they did there so that the plant could become in compliance with their effluent limits. And then starting at the bottom of page 11, I discussed the reimbursement. So because MES went into the plant, they were ordered by the Secretary of MDE. They were, of course, entitled to a full reimbursement of all their associated expenses with that project. So the city reimbursed MES about $614,000 for their personnel and operating costs. And just to remind folks, they were there about 8 or 9 months. Between around 7 to 25 or so staff were there every day. And then moving on to the next page, they received an additional reimbursement for the capital side. So these are the capital projects that went into calendar 2023, where MES was ordering the equipment, procuring it, installing it, and setting it up all on behalf of the city to make sure that, you know, they have things functioning and, you know, more long-term sustainability moving forward. Finally, I just wanted to note that these reimbursements are completely separate from the civil penalty that you may have seen in the news that resulted from the lawsuit. A portion of that is going to MDE, but MES has completed all of their work and they've been completely reimbursed for the work that they did there. The second issue, beginning on the bottom of page 12, is the annual funding statement. So this is language that we include in the Joint Chairman's report every year just to sort of complete the financial picture of MES. So beginning on page 13, we take a look at that. Exhibit 8 is the undesignated unrestricted net assets. So this is essentially MES's fund balance. These are the funds that they have that are not restricted by all the various stipulations that they have. And that has remained constant into the estimate for fiscal 2024. Beginning on page 14 is the overhead rates. So these are the rates that MES charges to all of their clients for the various types of projects. You can see that depending on how complicated the project is, how much equipment and preparation they need, the rates are going to differ from the different types of projects. And it has come up before, the, you know, discussion of, are the rates even for all of their clients? So we just asked the MES, you know, discuss a little bit in more detail how those rates are set, how they're working to lower them, and if there's a possibility to charge a lower rate to the state clients versus the other clients. Exhibit 10 on page 15 is the project reserve fund balances. So these are sort of some pots that MES has on hand that they can use to supplement specific projects in case things like timeline or budgets change, so that they don't have to go back, you know, cause further delays with more budgetary action. So you can see here that they had a couple transactions with these project reserve funds in fiscal 2023 and 2024. And all of those transactions do receive prior approval from DBM, so they are aware of what's going on there. And then page 17 is the recommendation. DLS recommends that MES just continue to provide this annual funding statement so we can get that full picture of what's going on. And I just briefly wanted to touch on the updates, which is on page 18. So the first bullet there is regarding the bylaws. So this was a recommendation from the independent assessment of the board, which was a requirement from the MES Reform Act that they adopt bylaws for their agency. So the board voted to approve these in May 2023. They are available on the website. And then the second update is regarding the Office of Legislative Audits. So they published an audit in March 2023, so just after our hearing last year. And they had a repeat finding, which is regarding agreements for reimbursable projects. So there was a BPW requirement that MES have written agreements for these reimbursable projects, and they did not have those. They had one. So OLA just recommended that MES go ahead and try and execute those agreements with the partnering agencies. As I mentioned, this was a repeat finding. I will give the caveat that after the first finding, they did intend to work on it, but then the Reform Act, you know, they were tied up with a lot of those requirements. So we just asked that MES comment on the timeline for completing that, as well as their decision to consolidate the 79 projects into 9 cumulative agreements rather than individual agreements for each project. And that concludes my analysis, Madam Chair. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Carrie. Very efficient. Senator Selling, any questions? Okay, Dr. Glass, please, and whoever from your team you would like to join.
Yep. Ooh, big TV.
I know. It was like-
Good afternoon. Oh. Thank you, Madam Chair, Senator Elfreth, Senator Salling. For the record, my name is Charles Glass, Executive Director of the Maryland Environmental Service, and with me is
Ellen Furketic, Deputy Director of MES.
just before I go into the responses. Oh, well, thank you, Ms. Cook, and all of the entire DLS team for their thorough work on evaluating us again this year. I'd like to say that one of the things that the deputy director and I implemented was every week we moved onboarding from every 2 weeks to every week, every Wednesday. And we do our best, schedule permitting, to meet every new employee that gets hired on that opening day when they are being onboarded. We every once in a while, we switch it up every week. We talk about our 3 pillars to support the mission. And then I'm going to be all frozen, right? I'll do it out of, well, first of all, level of service, which is making sure that our level of service to all our state clients and partners and county clients is always held at the highest level, and our internal support services, our administrative services to everyone, from headquarters office through all of our sites throughout the state. 2, safety is actually first.
Yes.
And that's what I usually lead with. That's what I
Yes.
was learning. But safety and our final, there have been 7 fatalities in the history of MES. There have been no major injuries or fatalities in our 3.5 years in leadership. And we focus on that every day. And it is first in that presentation. And then last, education and training. So we have the standard state $5,250 to support education, but we also have created career ladders for a lot of our positions in the last few years, so that people know when they come in, as long as they can get continued certification, et cetera, they will be promoted in time. And we've created that and board approved, everything. So the rest of it will be pretty short and sweet. We always focus on lowering our expenses. If you were to compare us to the private sector, our overhead rate, fully fringe rate, is rock bottom. We've trended lower in time. We are as efficient as we possibly can be, and we will continue to work on that forever. So the current method of determining our fringe and overhead is 2 years out. It's audited by RSM, and we'll continue to work on lowering our cost. 2, preparing the funding statements. MES concurs with the recommendation. We will continue to prepare the funding statements. And item 3, the decision to consolidate the project agreements. It's 79 agreements. We go for legal sufficiency, lots of legal support time. We don't have 20 AAGs. We have 4. So it just takes time, and we are working on it. And we intend to be complete with the task by the end of this calendar year, 2024. And that's the end of those suggestions.
That might be a record. We appreciate it. Senator Solling, any questions for Dr. Bliss?
We've talked
Yeah.
about some of the details, which I'm glad, we had many opportunities to talk about some of our issues that we had in our district, but they have been very more than transparent and very helpful. And I want to thank you for that. So, I appreciate it.
Thank you, sir.
I think I said this last year, but you've taken an agency that had a lot of challenges and turned it around very quickly. And we appreciate that. And we appreciate your focus on the repeat audit finding. I know you had a lot to unravel in the last 3.5 years, but we appreciate your focus on that as well. And we've had many conversations about Back River and
Yes.
Patapsco, something that's very important, not just to Senator Stallings' district, but to the subcommittee and frankly to the entire Budget and Taxation Committee. As candid as you can be, how do you feel like things are going?
We have been out of there for the better part of the year. We did finish up the last capital projects in December, I think, November, maybe it was November, December. They were happy to see us go. I haven't noticed any changes, but we haven't been on the ground either. So I can't really say for sure.
Well, we appreciate your willingness to step in when needed. And
Absolutely.
hope we don't need that again, but
Hopefully not.
If I could just
Senator,
say
yeah.
One quick thing that I know that you guys been out for a year, but I know the work continued for a period of
Yes.
time, the contract work that you did have.
Right.
And I appreciate the ongoing work that you have. But I at the same time, just to let you know, it was appreciated that the state came in and did see and did, I guess you could say, you were more than proactive of doing the things that were very important to us, but important to our area.
Mhm.
And we, as Budget and Tax, went out and visited the plant, but now I see firsthand, the work that has been done, but at the same time, I have had good communication with them also.
Okay.
So that's ongoing. That won't stop. Just like you said, that's ongoing. But again, I appreciate what you've done, but I know at any given time, if I have concerns, I know where to go to. And I appreciate
We're
that.
always ready.
Thanks, Mr.
Thank you. Okay, I think we're wrapped up.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with us today. Enjoy the spring weather. All right, next we have the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund and Samantha Tapia to give us a briefing.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Sally.
We're gonna let Samantha go first. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, Samantha Tapia presenting on the Maryland Automobile Insurance Fund, also called Maryland Auto. Just a reminder of the agency structure. The agency is an independent, non-budgeted, but state subsidized agency established in 1972 to serve as an insurer of last resort for drivers in Maryland. It has two divisions: the Insure division that subsidizes auto insurance policies for drivers who do not qualify for plans sold in the private market, and the Uninsured division that handles claims filed against uninsured drivers. It operates on a calendar basis and has an independent system of accounting, but does report at the start of the year to DLS estimated operating expenditures for the immediately preceding year and a projection of expenditures for the year ahead. The projection for this year ahead, looking at page 1, and also exhibit 1 on page 2, this looks ahead at calendar 2024. Maryland Auto projects an increase of 4.7 million or 15.3% to 35.7 million in operational expenditures. This is largely for new personnel and salary increases, but also includes some new operational expenditures related to the increasing volume of claims and for outreach operations aimed at educating uninsured drivers on the option of Maryland Auto. In review of calendar 2023, in January 2023, there was a projected end of year surplus of 9.3 million. Which would have been its lowest point since the last assessment took place in 1989. Maryland Auto forecasted the assessment threshold of approximately 14.3 million per the industry standards would probably be crossed during the calendar year and trigger an assessment upon financial year closeout in early 2024. Chapter 535 was passed last session to support the agency in an effort to revive the insured division surplus. This included allowing the collection of 10.2 million in over-recoupment funds held by law since the last assessment in 1989, as well as an additional 2 million in uninsured motorist fine revenue, the existing share of which usually goes to the uninsured division. As for the estimated 2023 closeout, looking at exhibit 3 on page 5, with higher than forecasted numbers of policies written and enforced, premium revenue increased to an estimated 93.4 million. However, there was also a corresponding increase in claims incurred and an increase in other operational expenditures, leading to a net loss of approximately 12 million. With the support provided through Chapter 535, this left the surplus at approximately 20.9 million. But this is just above an assessment threshold of 19.1 million. Projected for calendar 2024 is a further increase in policies written and associated premium income to 109.1 million, along with an increase in expenditures to 126.6 million, which would lead to another net loss and reduction of the surplus to approximately 3.5 million, very well below the assessment threshold of 24.1 million. Therefore, we have an outlook similar to that of last year, but without a block of past over assessment funds to draw on. We've asked for commentary on 2 different issues. The first being policy cancellations, the second being rate setting. Starting with policy cancellations on page 10. Exhibit 7 on page 11. Maryland Auto has reported that it manages a high volume of policy cancellations. The exhibit compares calendar years 2022 and 2023 and the number of policy cancellations by cancellation type, with number of policies written and enforced approximately 53 to 63% higher. There was a corresponding increase of 52% in cancellations. This included a 48% increase in the number of cancellations by Maryland Auto and a 67% increase in the number of cancellations by premium finance company request. However, it also meant a 65% increase in the amount of dollars canceled through Maryland auto cancellations and 90% increase in the amount of dollars canceled through finance company request. Therefore, we've asked Maryland Auto to comment on the impacts of cancellations on financial projections, on the relationship between claim risk and policy cancellations, and on whether higher risk, higher premium policies are more frequently canceled. Looking at rate setting, starting on page 12, Exhibit 8 on page 13, graphs a measure of rate adequacy for different regions of Maryland for the calendar years 2018 through 2023. The inadequacy of rates was particularly high in calendar 2022, but made some improvement in calendar 2023. For example, in the Baltimore metropolitan area, 41% of costs were not covered by premium revenue in 2022, but this has lowered to 36% in 2023. All other regions saw similar or greater improvements. We've requested that Maryland Auto comment on how the number of policies in force contributes to rate adequacy and on what contributed most to an improvement in rate adequacy in 2023. In addition to Chapter 535 last year, the committees approved several report requests that provided for discussion over the year. The first request, this included tasking Maryland Auto with explaining the surplus decline and offering alternatives to address the problem. Maryland Auto reported that causes included a combination of stock market conditions, high inflation in the automobile industry, and increasing numbers and costs of claims in recent years. They offered a number of solutions. The first, more permanently increasing Maryland Auto's share of uninsured motorist fines, for example, to 20% of the total fine revenue. And they also offered two new fee options. The first being a new surcharge of $4 per vehicle insured in the state, which would be charged to each insurer in the state. That could generate more than $20 million per year. The other option would be an additional fee, for example, $1 to $5 for each vehicle registration in the state, which could generate between $5 and $26 million, depending on how that is set. And then, of course, assigning all or part of the new revenue to Maryland Auto. In the same Joint Chairman's reports, Maryland Insurance Administration was tasked with evaluating and making recommendations on the Maryland Auto rate setting model and the overall financial stability of the agency. MIA's primary recommendations in the submission were against the expansion of a high-risk customer base and in favor of increasing rates or modifying the rate setting model at Maryland Auto or the residual market structure in Maryland. Taking a quick look at the uninsured division, Exhibit 11 on page 17. The uninsured division has a smaller budget funded by a share of the uninsured motorist fine revenue. In calendar 2023, this was roughly $4.5 million. By statute, this amount increases each year by the Consumer Price Index for all urban consumers. Unfortunately, the estimated calendar 2023 financial position is different than what was projected last January. Claims incurred in 2023 were 125% higher than in 2022. Along with increases in other expenditures, total expenditures are approximately $7.6 million, resulting in a net loss of approximately $2.2 million. With a starting surplus of $1.8 million, the closeout surplus is estimated to be negative by approximately $360,000. With similar costs and no change in income, calendar 2024 is projected to have a closing negative surplus of approximately $2.2 million. In summary, we recommend that in order to keep the committees informed on the financial status of each division, Maryland Auto submit financial statements to the committees on a quarterly basis through fiscal 2025. But apart from that, we concur with the governor's budget. You can take questions or defer to the agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Samantha. Okay, Mr. Redmer.
Thank you. Thanks for having us. First, I want to thank Samantha for her hard work on the analysis itself. We've met with Samantha numerous times, and I appreciate and am impressed by not only the hard work, but the focus and commitment that she brought to trying to actually learn our organization and our operations, which I believe makes the report itself much more accurate and effective. With me today, Madam Chair, is next to me is our controller, Amy Nell. Behind me is Dave Pfeiffer, our COO, Sandy Dodson, our government affairs manager, and Dennis Carroll, who is a contractual employee, having retired after many years of state service, including as a deputy insurance commissioner and former general counsel of IWIF and Chesapeake Insurance. I look forward to answering all of your questions, and hopefully I'll address many of them in advance during my prepared remarks. First, and probably most importantly, to follow up on Samantha's comments, we will not know for certain until our financial statement audit concludes in early March. So we'll have a better idea in mid-February, but we are very optimistic that we will not trigger an assessment in 2024 based on our financial statements in 2023. And as Samantha mentioned, our ability to avoid an assessment on the industry this year is due in large part to the General Assembly passing Senate Bill 530 last year, which gave us access to the previous over-recoupment and an additional $2 million in funding from the uninsured motorist fines. Without those additional funds, an assessment for 2023 would certainly be occurring. However, it is important to note that based on our projections for 2024, there will be an assessment in 2025, probably in the ballpark that would be equivalent to $3 to $5 per policy around the state. The report requested that we comment on two things. We've provided written testimony, but I'll briefly discuss the comments. The first dealt with the cancellations and projections, and our projections are incredibly difficult for us generally to begin with because we can't control most of the financial circumstances of our organization. We can't go out and sell insurance, Senator Salling, to you unless you've been canceled or turned down by a couple of carriers. So it's very difficult for us to make projections because we only get what the rest of the market doesn't want. And other carriers, their appetite for new business expands, our business drops off, and then vice versa. And the uncertainty in projections is much more related to those fluctuations than it is our cancellation rate. Our cancellation rate is overall high, 40 to 50%. And it's also important to note as you look at our financials that the high cancellation rate results in a much higher than desired expenses as we serve those policyholders. As a matter of fact, we have some policyholders that cancel multiple times during the year. They buy a policy, it's the right thing to do. They run out of money, the policy gets canceled, they scrape up a little more money, and they get another policy. And obviously that churn of activity requires a lot of expenses for that. The second comment was whether the number of policies we write affect the adequacy of our rates. Rate inadequacy is based on, in part, our affordability index, which only applies to low-income communities. It has no effect in 80% of the zip codes around the state. And we're striving to become more rate adequate. We have a rate increase for personal lines that was back in August, another one pending for February. We had a commercial increase in October. And I'll point out when we look at rate inadequacy, to varying degree, our rates have been adequate for decades. That's how the General Assembly created us 50 years ago. Samantha also asked us to just chat generally about auto industry trends around the country. And nationally, auto claims have soared. 2021 nationally, auto claims were 3.8 billion. 3.8 billion, rising in 22 to 26 billion. And just in the first half of 23, it was $24 billion. That's significant. Repair cost has increased about 20% over the last 3 years, in part to just general inflation, but also to the supply chain issues, particularly electronic parts, that we've heard about probably since the pandemic. And also frequency and severity of claims has increased. Now, frequency is how often is it somebody's having an accident? And the severity is naturally, well, how severe is it? What's the total cost of damage? And severity itself has increased 163% from 2019 to 2023. Maryland Auto specific, our average claim payment has increased 46% just in the last 3 years. And that's significant. And as you all know yourselves, if you go home and look at your auto insurance bill, they have been increasing significantly. Rate increases nationwide were not nationwide, the insurance company, but around the country was 24% in 2023 and 29% from 21 to 22. As mentioned, we took an 11% rate increase in August. We're taking another 6% in February. We're going to look at another increase probably the middle of next year. But I do point out that we have tried to hold the line in those communities where we have the affordability index. Again, that's about 20% of the zip codes. And when we talk about rate inadequacy, for us to become adequate, it would require rate increases in the neighborhood of 26%. But in some communities, as an example, the Baltimore metro area, that would be a 43% rate increase. And as Samantha mentioned, our business has increased significantly. We probably doubled in the last 18 months. That's not a result of what we do. That's the rest of the industry saying we don't want to insure these folks. So around the country and in Maryland, underwriting standards have increased. They've been losing historic amounts of money, and they're trying to get rid of risk instead of getting new risk. As a result, again, our policies went from 24,000 to 39,000 in about 18 months, not as a result of anything we do, but from the rest of the industry saying we don't want these risks. And if you read the transcripts from earning calls from the big insurance companies, they talk about that they've dramatically reduced their marketing expense because they don't want new business. Think about the number of Geico insurance commercials you see today compared to 3, 4, or 5 years ago. You'll see a couple, but nothing that we were seeing, and that's across the board throughout the industry. So moving on, if you look at page 9, Exhibit 5, that significant increase in policies that we've seen. Let me give you the narrative to go along with the graph. Let's go back to 2020. When I arrived at Maryland Auto in May of 2020, the state was closed. We were in the middle of I thought it was the middle of the pandemic. It was probably the beginning of the pandemic. But the state was closed. Nobody was driving. And if you're not driving, you're not out there hitting things, right? So if you're not hitting things, insurance companies aren't paying claims. So in 2020, insurance carriers around the country ended the year with historic profits and money in the bank. And as we know, if you've got money in the bank, you have to deploy it somewhere. And many of those carriers decided they were going to buy market share. So in 21 and the beginning of 22, they lowered their premiums, but more importantly, they loosened their underwriting. They were writing risk back then that they would not have written a couple of years ago. And as a result of that, each and every month, we lost policyholders because the industry was saying, we want more. So they were taking policyholders that previously would have come to us. And then the country opened up, people started driving again. And once again, we had the demolition derby. Folks were running around hitting things. And as you know, they were driving faster, hitting things harder, and driving crazier than ever before. So these carriers saw historic losses in 21 and 22. So what did they do? They increased their premiums. More importantly, they tightened their underwriting. They didn't want any more business. They had to clean up their balance sheets. So as they began to reject folks, they came to us, and each and every month our policyholder count went up, doubled over about 18 months. And again, nothing that we did, we only take what's left over. Just happens to be that there was a lot more left over at that time. And moving to page 15, exhibit 10, claims cost. So we write a lot of business in lower income communities. That means that we're going to be more susceptible to being a victim of fraud. People are driving faster, they're driving crazier. The cost of materials has soared as we repair these cars. And who would have anticipated the significant increase that we've seen in carjackings and car thefts? Nobody would have anticipated that. Who pays those bills? All of us in the insurance industry pay those bills, and that has driven, in part, some of the significant claim increases that we've seen. And again, if you look at where these carjackings and thefts occur, typically they're in urban areas, which is where we write a substantial part of our business. Moving on to the affordability index referenced in page 12, we look at each zip code in the state, and we strive to, and we look at the median income, and we strive to keep premiums for liability only coverage, just on liability, within 2.9% of that median income. And as Samantha notes, that complicates our ability to maintain surplus. But we believe that raising rates in low-income communities would actually hurt low-income communities, but more importantly, that it would increase the number of uninsured drivers that we have on the road. Now, if you go home and you look at your auto insurance bill, and look at the uninsured motorist cost that you pay for, that's to protect you in case you're hit by an uninsured driver. Think about what that cost would do if we had a 5% increase in uninsured drivers, or 10%, or what have you. You're going to pay more because of uninsured drivers on the road. Bless you. We believe our affordability index, as you know, in the statute, is the only tool currently available to moderate the number of the increased number of drivers that are uninsured. And as I mentioned, it's only for liability coverage. Some of us believe that it should actually be expanded to include comp and collision, to include all forms of insurance. And finally, I'm going to comment on the request that we provide quarterly financial statements. We're happy to do that. We would like to have the due date delayed just a couple of weeks. It normally takes us a number of weeks to close out the books from the previous month and the previous quarter. And we're happy to put this in writing, but as an example, for the June 2024 report, we'd like to have that due the end of July. So it'll be the end of the following month. September, the end of October. The full year would be March the 15th, which is when we finalize our statements and certify them for the Maryland Insurance Administration. And then finally, the March report be due the middle of May. And with that, I'm going to turn to Amy Nell, our controller, and ask her to provide just a couple of comments on the uninsured division.
Okay, thank you, Al. Good afternoon. Just want to add a little bit of extra context and color to the uninsured division financial picture, which starts on page 16 of your report. The projections are on page 17. Just as a reminder, the uninsured division is responsible for paying claims on the state's behalf to victims of traffic accidents caused by uninsured or unidentified motor vehicle operators or owners. As noted in the report, the primary source of revenue to the uninsured division is its share of the MVA uninsured fine money. And that increases annually in line with the consumer price index that's cited in the statute. In 2018, that increase was 1.8%. The last several years on average, that increase has been 2.9% annually. On the other hand, the claims inflation has outpaced the consumer price index that's used to allocate that fine money to the uninsured division. The average paid claim in the uninsured division increased 7% from 2021 to 2022, and we saw a double-digit increase from 2022 to 2023. Al talked about industry-wide claims inflation is up. This is under that, but still significant. The other source of revenue to the uninsured division is collections on notes and judgments. After a claim is processed in the uninsured division, the uninsured motorist who caused the accident, if it's not a hit and run accident, is administered, there is a judgment administered, and the uninsured division pursues collection or reimbursement of that claim payout. However, a substantial portion of those claims do involve hit and run accidents. And in 2023, the claims payouts related to hit and run accidents exceeded the dollar value of claims paid out for accidents where the actual uninsured motorist was identified. And so you can't pursue collection on those if you don't know, who caused the accidents. Those are not collectible debts. Collection on the remaining debts, even when the uninsured motorist is a known party, is challenging. 45% of the outstanding notes and judgments receivable balance are due from parties who are incarcerated. Prior to 2020, licenses were flagged for suspension if an uninsured motorist had a balance due to the uninsured division. But this was rescinded in 2020 with legislation, which left little to no incentive for repaying those debts to the uninsured division. And in fact, the fine for driving uninsured is less than the cost of an average policy at Maryland Auto. From 1995 to 2011, the uninsured division transferred a total of $41 million in surplus to the state. Surplus was $19 million at the end of 1994, and at the end of 2011 was in a deficit position following those transfers of $900,000. It did recover modestly, partly due to the help of the MVA amnesty program, which resulted in an additional $3 million in net income to the uninsured division. But at the end of 2023, we are projecting to be in a deficit position of about $350,000. And as Al mentioned, those financial statements are subject to audit and actuarial analysis at this time. That number could change, but those are the projections as of now. And then at the end of 2024, surplus is projected to deteriorate further to be about $2.2 million, as Samantha noted, largely due to the claims inflation outpacing the consumer price index inflation.
Okay.
Okay, thank you. Any questions? Thank you for that. It was very thorough. We've had the discussion privately, and I want to raise it here as well. What I found just in the year of being in the subcommittee, but we tend to unearth a lot of policy challenges via our budget, and that's in large part because we have very talented analysts looking under every rock. But there's a couple of policy issues here that you've just discussed that I think are worthwhile for us to highlight again, and would ask that you sit down with the chairs, the presiding committees to discuss. Certainly the CPI instead of claims inflation piece, I think is worthwhile for discussion to the policy committee, as is, to your point about the fine for driving uninsured is less than.
Right.
These are all things I think we really need to reconsider from a policy perspective, and none of them individually will write your budget ship, but I think it's high time we have these policy discussions.
Yep. We agree.
Okay. And then the last piece on the policy discussion is the turn down, I think is also worthwhile for the policy committee to discuss. And I'm correct, you're in a weird spot, but finance, even though JPR has transportation, where would you fall?
I'll defer to our government relations manager on predicting where that might be.
On the to turn down would go to finance.
Okay,
But change to the fine structure would go to JPR.
okay.
My,
Okay,
my response was going to be wherever President Ferguson wants it to go.
Okay. You know, and it's still early days in session, so I would like to ask those three plus any other
Sure.
policy flags you would like us to discuss. If you could put those together in a memo for us, and then
Yep.
we can sit down again, sit down with Chair of Finance, sit down with Chair of JPR and the Senate President's office and start to dig
Happy to do
through
that. Happy to do that.
some
And
changes.
Madam Chair, we, as you mentioned, we have had multiple conversations and we do appreciate the focus and the interest that you have on Maryland Auto and helping us improve.
Thank you for all you do.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That concludes that hearing. And next we have the Office of the State Prosecutor and our friend Jacob Polikoff. Jacob, take it away.
Always thrilled to be a friend. Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to be back in session. We have the Office of the State Prosecutor today, and just a quick refresher. Their purview is to investigate and, where warranted, prosecute criminal offenses affecting the honesty and integrity of governmental officials, institutions, and the electoral process. They can prosecute certain criminal offenses, including election law and public ethics law violations, state bribery law violations, including or involving public officials or employees, misconduct in the office by public officials or employees, and extortion, perjury, or obstruction of justice, as well as investigating and prosecuting any offense that takes place in more than one county within the state or more than one state, including Maryland. The fiscal 2025 budget for OSP increases by $307,353 or 11.1% to a rounded $3 million. And as we'll see in Exhibit 1 on page 2, most of the budget, 88%, is dedicated to personnel spending. Other significant parts include contractual services such as transcription services for depositions, interviews, and other proceedings, along with rent so that they have somewhere to work. On page 3, we'll find Exhibit 2, which includes the proposed budget change. The fiscal 25 allowance, as previously mentioned, increases by more than $300,000. This increase is largely driven by a reduction in the turnover rate from just over 8.5% to just a smidge over 1%, 1.01%. This along with salary increases and associated fringe benefits. A couple of things I'd like to point out within Exhibit 2 include the costs associated with one new paralegal position converted from a contractual position, along with reclassification costs associated with 2 investigator positions and 1 paralegal position, along with removal of one-time funding from last year, fiscal 24. That removal of funding, including for new computers and new vehicles, which have all been purchased. On page 4, we'll find personnel data showing that OSP does extremely well. They have no vacancies as of the end of December 2023, which is a highlight. Quite literally, I have it highlighted. The one new position in fiscal 25 is a contractual conversion, as previously mentioned, of a paralegal position to support the work of the new unit, which we'll talk about in a moment, focusing on official misconduct and special victims. Worth noting that the new turnover rate of 1.01% means that OSP's necessary vacancies are 0.16 positions. So good luck with that. The first key observation can be found on page 5. The first key observation involves the new unit, which I've just mentioned, investigating official misconduct and special victims. In fiscal 2024, OSP created a new unit within the office devoted to investigating official misconduct as well as cases involving special victims. The existence of this unit allows OSP to place a more direct focus on cases involving matters of official misconduct and cases involving special victims, and it allows them to separate this work from work of the other areas of the office. It's done for a couple of reasons. The first is an effort to make the investigation process start in a more efficient manner at OSP, not that it wasn't before, but just to sort of clarify and streamline things. And also to bring awareness to these types of cases and educating agencies about what constitutes official misconduct or a case involving a special victim. And again, that's done in an effort to make for a smoother investigation process, starting with when a complaint is received at an agency, rather than having the case be identified as one of official misconduct or involving a special victim only when OSP becomes involved, which could sometimes be later in the process. OSP is actively working with inspectors general and other state agencies and other authorities to provide this education and increase awareness. Data regarding the performance of this unit is not currently reported in the annual Managing for Results report from DBM. At the time this analysis was written, OSP's self-published report was not yet available, but OSP has informed the Department of Legislative Services that the agency did receive 58 complaints in fiscal 2023 that would fall under the purview of this unit. And we asked for that number just to sort of get a picture of what the workload might look like in the future. It's not the easiest thing to predict, but that gives us a somewhat steady jumping off point. Tracking the number of complaints as well as the results of complaints, including investigations, prosecutions, and convictions, similar to the way in which other cases are currently tracked, would be extremely helpful in analyzing the performance of this new unit. So OSP should comment on how the work of the new unit will impact existing staff and if additional personnel are expected to be needed in the coming years as the unit takes on potentially more cases. OSP should also work with DBM, the Department of Budget Management, to add sections tracking data specific to cases involving official misconduct and special victims to the MFR. I'll then move to key observation number 2, which starts at the bottom of page 5, which discusses the continued growth in complaints received, along with an increase in investigations. And Exhibit 3 on page 6 shows the number of complaints, investigations, and closed cases since fiscal 2019. The number of complaints submitted to OSP, as we see in Exhibit 3, continued to increase in fiscal 23. Pardon me. Yes, it continued to increase in fiscal 23, reaching 710, which was an increase of 271 complaints, or actually an increase of 62%. The number of open investigations also increased from 63 cases in fiscal 22 to 109 in fiscal 23, with 263 total cases closed, a 54% increase. The increase in complaints outpaces the increased number of closed cases. So we have data that indicates OSP's case management system is achieving the agency's goal of making it easier for complaints to come to OSP, and that the greater number of complaints and investigations is not stopping OSP from closing cases rather in an efficient manner. OSP currently estimates the growth in complaints and investigations open will taper off in fiscal 24. However, if this growth doesn't slow as expected, OSP should consider how continued growth will impact their operations and what they can do internally to continue to effectively manage the growth in these metrics. These considerations could include caseloads for attorneys and paralegals, how long OSP takes to process a case from start to finish, obviously taking into account that different cases tend to have different case processing times, and how each individual area of work is impacted by increased complaints and investigations. The third key observation, beginning at the bottom of page 6, regards election law referrals and enforcement actions increasing. As you might remember, OSP is responsible for investigating referrals related to potential violations of state election law and making impartial decisions on enforcement and prosecution where warranted. Referrals go to the State Board of Elections first, which reviews claims before sending them to OSP if they're found to be credible. Common violations referred to OSP by the State Board of Elections include failure to file required reports or pay required fees, authority line violations, voting by non-citizens, and overcontributions. The number of referrals does tend to fluctuate in concert with the federal election cycle. So often OSP will see an increase in election law referrals in the fiscal year numbered after a federal election year. So as such, fiscal 23 saw an increase in referrals over the prior year. However, the number of referrals in fiscal 23 was also more than double the amount from fiscal 21. And the number of enforcement actions grew significantly in fiscal 23 compared to fiscal 21. Exhibit 4 in the middle of page 7 shows the number of referrals for fiscal 2019 through fiscal 2023, along with the number of enforcement actions taken in each year since fiscal 2020. And fiscal 2020 is the first year that that particular metric was tracked. And I will stop having to tell you that next year when fiscal 2019 probably comes off the graph. These large increases in referrals and enforcement actions from previous election years represent what is at this point an outlier every year. Data regarding referrals was not tracked in the same way prior to fiscal 2019. So there's a somewhat limited scope for determining if similar spikes have occurred in the past. OSP has stated that the increase in referrals in fiscal 23 is due to several factors, one of which is a new reporting process implemented by SBE, as well as increases in certain types of complaints. This new reporting process that SBE has implemented allows them to transfer complaints to OSP at a faster pace, as opposed to the previous process, which involved complaints being sent in bulk after an election. OSP has additionally reported an increase in complaints involving theft of campaign signage, non-citizen voting, and double voting in fiscal 23. OSP should comment on if the number of referrals is expected to decrease back to prior levels in the next election year, and if and how the higher number of referrals and enforcement actions impacted their operations in fiscal 23. With that, I have on page 9 the operating budget recommended action, which DLS recommends concurring with the governor's allowance. And I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Jacob. Okay, Mr. State Prosecutor, I will make my joke every year. I hope this is the only time I have to see you this year. Would you like to bring your team up?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as is my hope as well. Not based on any personality.
Of course.
Understand jokes. Yes.
It's my favorite one.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Senator Selling. My name is Charlton Howard. I'm the Maryland State Prosecutor, and I and my team appreciate the opportunity to talk to you today about the important work of our office. I am joined here today by our Deputy State Prosecutor, Sarah David, sitting next to me, and our Director of Administration, Ruth Sweeney, sitting behind me here, who represent our Ravens cheering section. I missed the memo on the purple tie, so I apologize for that. The Office of State Prosecutor, as Jacob has eloquently stated, has jurisdiction over specific crimes related to political corruption, official misconduct, and election law. I'd like to briefly address 2 areas of interest and then entertain any questions you may have on, especially on the things that Jacob's talked about, so we can certainly provide context and further information. Last year, this committee made it possible for us to hire a special victims unit prosecutor and investigator, for which we're very thankful. We were thrilled to hire Mary Setzer, who joined our office from the United States Attorney's Office, where she led their human trafficking efforts, served as their Office Violence Against Women's Act coordinator, and prosecuted numerous federal human trafficking, child exploitation, and sex crimes cases. She's also formerly the chief of the Domestic Violence Division of the Special Victims Unit at the Anne Arundel County State's Attorney's Office. So we've hired the best in the state, in our view, to help us with this effort. We also hired Special Agent Jeff Stoddard, a retired Baltimore police detective who spent over 2 decades investigating special victims cases and internal affairs cases. And of course, this unit will cover the intersection of those types of cases as we move forward. They certainly enhance our ability to investigate and prosecute official misconduct complaints involving sexual assaults or exploitation, and also allow us to provide, as Jacob mentioned, training to administrative organizations such as Human Resources and Internal Affairs divisions to identify potential criminal special victims cases at the complaint stage, thereby limiting and most importantly, re-victimization of the victim as they have to go through multiple interviews and examinations but also allowing us to preserve critical evidence and enabling a successful investigation and prosecution if that turns out to be the appropriate question. We're not trying to drive prosecution as the only option. The main purpose is to take care of victims who suffer under abuse from an official, public official. I also wish to talk about our election law complaints, which Jacob's mentioned, which have grown significantly over the past 5 years. Internally, we're managing to meet these obligations by reassigning some of our personnel from public corruption to election law efforts, and I think we're fairly successful now. Our goal always with election law efforts is to ensure compliance, not necessarily punishment. We want to ensure that people are not deterred from participating in the political process, and to ensure the campaigns can come into compliance as quickly as possible, and we can have a robust and legal dialogue on the electoral level. These growing numbers reflect several different categories of complaints, which I can certainly go into in detail if anyone is interested. But the failure to files, double voters, non-citizen voters, and other election law violations. One thing I did wish to highlight is that evolving technology makes our enforcement more complicated and makes these violations more widespread. To use one example of our enforcement actions, this year we cited the 1776 Project Pack $20,250 fine for over 13,000 text messages that were sent out without an authority line violation. In the past, if you skip back 4 or 5 years, an authority line violation on a campaign sign, the fine is very minimal, made them take down their signs, et cetera. But now you just can't pull back 13,000 text messages or emails or other types of electronic dissemination. This is a concern to us, and we will continue to track, because allowing access to thousands of people with the press of a button requires much more security to ensure the public knows who paid for the information they're receiving about candidates. While our resources are limited, we work hard for our important mission. Very proud of our zero vacancy rate, which I think our personnel are all very heavily involved and feel, I think, a passion for this type of work. And I certainly appreciate that. And I think that accounts to a great deal for our success. We appreciate the governor's allowance in our budget and concur with that allowance. And thank you for your attention, your support of our office. And I would withhold any further comments unless you have specific questions based on Jacob's remarks.
Thank you. I have a couple just to get into the weeds of some of this. First of all, I'm going to commend your office for appreciating that the difference between a yard sign and increased technology. And I think you are on the cutting edge of that work, and I want to commend you for it. But similar to the conversation we just had with MAIF, did that case in particular bring up any recommendations you have to the General Assembly in terms of need for policy change reflecting the changing technology in our campaigns?
Well, certainly we work very closely with state board elections, particularly with that case, because we try to track our enforcement actions to policy issues that they want to proceed. Sarah was our prosecutor on that case, so I'll allow her to address it.
Thank you. And I think that, what we're discussing now is kind of this twofold approach. One, obviously, to be able to detect the technology, which is more of a resource issue. But from the policy standpoint, we're also dealing with a similar, it's interesting to listen to that conversation with me, because we have a similar challenge in that contribution limits are, let's say, $6,000. But the fines that can be incurred are significantly less. And so the cost of doing business hasn't sort of risen. And so that's one of the things that we're looking at, although we would be looking to do something like that next year. We don't kind of like to look into those things in an election year. But we are also looking at and working with, we thank the governor and his administration for putting forth a bill to, actually target and address threats to election law judges. And that's because, again, what we're seeing is there's a difference between the direct threat of, I don't like you, we're having an interpersonal thing, and what's being published online, the doxing and kind of the ubiquity of these. And so we have been addressing kind of this in the policy space and are looking to address more of that next year.
I appreciate that and appreciate you teeing that up, and look forward to working with you on that next year, because that sounds like an issue we need to tackle. Okay, next question on, just curious, I don't know if it's a good or bad thing for our community that you've seen an increase in such a drastic increase in complaints received. Maybe it's a sign of health and trust in your office. Can you give us an example of, because there's a huge disparity, and I'm just curious, between complaints received and investigations opened? Can you give us some examples of what makes up for that gap?
Certainly. Well, it's no good deed goes unpunished, Senator. And when we opened up a complaint portal on our website, allowing the general public to forward complaints directly to us, and I've always believed, if you don't get more complaints, if you don't get a number of complaints that are not valid or that are inapposite, then you haven't cast the net wide enough, because then you're missing things. If every complaint that walks in is a valid complaint, I'm missing some. So we intentionally did that. We left that. We tried to put as clear an explanation on that portal as possible. And we also take phone calls and walk-ins, et cetera. But, a lot of our complaints come that are not referred from another public agency, come from the general public through that portal. And many of them are not within our jurisdiction. As I think I mentioned last time, and a metric that I intend to track here is we refer.
Hmm.
I personally look at every complaint. We have a very efficient triage method, but if someone's had something wrong happen to them and I can't help them, I don't want to just send them away.
Right.
So we refer a number of complaints to various agencies that I know can assist, whether it's consumer protection or an IG in an area where something's not criminal, but certainly the agency shouldn't have done that, if you accept what they said is true. So we get a large number of those.
Okay.
So I don't consider the fact that I look at it and say, you got screwed over by this business. I think it's more a consumer protection issue. I'm going to refer it over there as an investigation. When we say we open an investigation, and I also don't count if I call the complainant for more information and it turns out not to be within our jurisdiction as an investigation.
Okay.
So you triage, you take out those that larger number of complaints, and some people complain a lot. Like there are frequent flyers who I'll get, I feel a paternal attachment to them because I'll see a message from them every week or something telling me.
Our office experienced the same.
Yes, I think it's true with any government function. You get some people who and some people are most of our complainants are not lawyers, so they say, "Oh, you do perjury." Well, my spouse lied in my court hearing for child custody or something like that. That's not perjury. We can only do perjury by public officials, but we don't refer that to the state's attorney's office or other areas. With so that another example that is more in an election law context, when you have an allegation of non-citizen voting. Most of our allegations of non-citizen voting come because someone filled out a jury form in a county and said they're not a citizen, so they can't serve on a jury. The counties send that over to the local board of elections. They run the cross comparison, and we get Chuck Howard got out of jury duty by claiming not to be a citizen and going back to that. Most of those we investigate are, oh, I thought you meant like a resident of this county or something like that. But that increases the number. If we find that someone was a resident of the county or is a US citizen, that's great. We don't investigate or prosecute them for that. But I do send that referral back to the state's attorney's office, say, oh, by the way, this person lied on their jury form. It's up to you to figure it out.
Okay. So, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody wants to serve on a jury, so I get that. Okay.
So that's just a
that makes
public safety tip. Don't lie on your jury form if you're not a citizen.
Thank you. And lastly, not a question, I just want to commend you for the official misconduct in Special Victims Unit. I think it's an incredibly healthy move for your office, and hope it's not going to be utilized as much as we believe it will be, but I think it's an incredibly important step forward for public policy generally. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Senator. And I also want to thank you. We received 3 positions last year when we were here. The other position we used to hire a financial crimes investigator, which we have not forgotten about traditional corruption with white collar crime. And I need people much smarter than I to look at those records and figure it out. So thank you for that position as well.
Okay. Thank you so much.
All right.
Good to see you. We might want to bring the next crowd in. Yeah, thank you, Jacob. Okay. While the rest of the group comes, we are going to start our conversation on the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operations Fund, joined by Madeline Miller.
Shall we wait?
Yeah, let's wait just a second. Everybody to hear everything you have to say.
I can read it word for word.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Would you like to be Senator Rose Pep today?
Yeah.
Thank you all so much for your patience as we got through 3 other budgets, and glad you can join us. So again, here for the Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operations Fund, Madeline Miller has been working on the budget all year. Madeline, take it away.
Thank you. Good afternoon. Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Madeline Miller, and today I will be presenting the DLS forecast of the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operations Fund, also known as the MEMSOF. The MEMSOF is funded mostly by a biennial surcharge of $29 on motor vehicle registrations and is used to support key components of the emergency medical services system. As shown in Exhibit 1 on page 3, funding supports the Maryland State Police Aviation Command, the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, the AMOS Fund, the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, or MIFRI, and the Shock Trauma Center operating subsidy. The spending reflected, the spending shown in this pie chart is representative of only fiscal 25, but the Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows the growth in or change in MEMSOF expenditures from fiscal 23 through 25. DLS requests that in the comment today, the Department of State Police comment on its fiscal 23 MEMSOF expenditures, as the spending reflected in the budget is approximately $200,000 higher than the comptroller's report of the MEMSOF fund would indicate. For more discussion now on Exhibit 2, the allowance for total MEMSOF expenditure increases by about 1.2% compared to the prior year. And this growth is primarily attributable to employee compensation enhancement funding, as well as there being higher maintenance and repair costs for the state's helicopters. By dollar change and percent growth, MS PAC expenditure increases the most from fiscal 24 to 25, and actually if across the exhibit from 23 as well. And this is indicative of, or some of the increase is because general fund support of helicopter maintenance and replacement radios was available in fiscal 2023, in fiscal 24, and in fiscal 25. Moving forward, there's expected to be a return to the 80-20 split, where helicopter expenditure would be supported 80% by special funds, 20% by general funds, instead of being 100% general. So this is one of the ways in which there's been general fund support of the MEMSOF in recent years. The decrease of about $5 million, or of exactly $5 million for the R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center reflects removal of a one-time $5 million grant provided in fiscal 24. And I will also note here that because the working appropriation and allowance do not recognize adjustments for salary enhancements that are currently budgeted within the Department of Budget and Management, personnel expenditures may increase for MIFRI, MIMS, and MS PAC higher than the allowance reported in Exhibit 2. On page 6 of the document, Exhibit 3 shows MEMSOF revenues and expenditures from fiscal 2014 through 2023. MVA registration for fee was last increased, I believe, in 2013 with an effect in 2014, that as well as funding from the moving violation surcharge being added in effect in 2014, which increased revenue fees and resulted in a surplus to the fund in fiscal 2014 through 17. That accumulation of funds was then used in years where expenditure was higher than the typical revenue years. Between fiscal 22 and 23, revenues increased by 18.4% in response to registration revenue increasing following its COVID pandemic era decreasing, as well as a $10 million general cash infusion, and salary enhancements being supported with general funds in fiscal 22 and in fiscal 23. The exhibit 4 on page 7 shows that's MVA registration fee and shows how the or reflects how the revenue line within on page 6 remains fairly stable through fiscal 2014 through 2022. You will note the increase in revenue over expenditure in fiscal 23 due to additional general cash fund infusion. Moving now to the DLS assumptions and forecast. The forecast itself can be found on page 9, and the assumptions that delineate the rules for DBM and the rules that DLS follows when preparing the forecast can be found on page 8. The major differences include the growth rate calculation. DBM uses a shorter growth period, which means that some of the growth the growth in the DLS forecast tends to be higher because of it having a longer period and more time to have inflation costs. Other differences that are unique to this, or a difference that's unique to this year, is that for the shock trauma center, DBM has the operating subsidy. Excuse me. Yes, for the shock trauma center, DBM does not reflect that there were $63,667 in additional and funds expended in fiscal 23 that are supposed to be applied as revenues in fiscal 24. It's a small change that the DLS forecast incorporates. The resulting change of growth rate calculations means that DBM anticipates a 0.23% growth rate for the MS PAC, and DLS reflects a 6.79% increase. This is largely due to the longer time frame and also due to the DBM forecast not incorporating the percentage of helicopter maintenance funds that would have been from the MEMSOF if they had not been supported with general funds instead. DLS asked today that DBM comment on its assumptions in preparing the MEMSOF forecast, particularly for how its fiscal 24 and 25 salary enhancements are budgeted between general and special funds. In fiscal 22 and 23, some of the salary enhancements were supported with general funds. So we're asking to clarify if general fund support will continue or if the 80-20 split should be expected in fiscal 25 and for the out years. The DLS forecast projects MEMSOF will remain solvent through fiscal 25 with an estimated closing balance of $4 million. Temporarily reduced MEMSOF expenditures and the influx of $35.5 million in general fund support in fiscal 23 and 2024 extend the fund's solvency, but expenditures are expected to exceed its revenues in fiscal 25 and beyond, as shown in Exhibit 7 on page 11. The DLS forecasts that the fund will become insolvent in fiscal 26, and in that year require approximately $18.8 million in additional general fund support. The spending gap is expected to increase and grow to about $38.9 million by fiscal 2030. Slight changes could push the date of insolvency to fiscal 2025 if salary enhancements in fiscal 24 and 2025 are much higher than projected. DLS asked that the administration and the EMS board comment on how they intend to improve the fund's health, particularly for fiscal 2026 and beyond. DLS also states that to keep pace with rising costs, the General Assembly should consider fee increases or other revenue enhancements to sustain current levels of MEMSOF supported operations. This would require the enactment of separate legislation no later than the 2025 session for any changes to be implemented prior to fiscal 2026. The forecast that DBM prepares can be found as Appendix 3 to this document, and I'd be happy to take any questions at this time.
Thank you, Madeline. We appreciate there's a lot of moving pieces to this particular budget, a lot of different assumptions and a disagreement that we have to work out between DBM and DLS. Want to thank our colleague, Senator Jennings, for joining us today. I know this is a budget near and dear to his heart. Questions for Madeline before we invite the panel up? Okay, Madeline, so we did request DBM to comment. We don't have testimony from them, or?
I can check back.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right, I apologize in advance. We have 2 chairs and a lot of folks who want to speak. And so I'm assuming you all have organized yourselves as you do every year beforehand. So whoever would like to come up first, please do.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you. It's good to see you again. Last time I saw you was here a year ago. My name is Clay Stamp. I'm the chairman of the EMS board, and we have Dr. Ted Delbridge, the executive director of MEMS, with us, as well as other partners who speak with you this day as well. I just want to thank Madeline for her work, and clearly we are at a point now where we need your help in order to keep the integrity of our EMS system solvent and doing the good job that it does every day. The EMS board's an 11 member board that is organizationally diverse. It's supported by a 31 member advisory board that has 31 different organizations represented, and they deal with 5 different regions around the state to ensure that we identify opportunities, gaps, address them so that we can get the right patient to the right place in the right amount of time. Always patient first. But what I want to do, and the numbers speak for themselves, is just take a minute. As we started preparing for this, somebody mentioned that what we really should do is answer the question, what does this really mean and why does it matter? And I think for me, as the 14-year-old kid that became a fire cadet in Ocean City and became a dispatcher, an EMT, a paramedic, and 40 years later, as I renew my paramedic and have grown in this system, is that what we see here is an opportunity for the fragmentation of our system, something beautiful that we've built. And what's interesting is, and not to take you through a long extent of history, but this system this year is 50 years old. This is our 50th birthday this year. So we're excited about that. In the 1970s, R. Adams Cowley had a vision. He brought his experiences from Vietnam back. U.S. Department of Transportation gave a lot of money to EMS agencies because of the number of fatalities on roadways. We built a bottom-up organization back then in counties and called them EMS regions, where hospitals, public health, local governments all got together. We had a statewide advisory board. But then what was really creative is in 1993, this body created the EMS system in Maryland, and it was masterful. They created an 11-member board that was diverse, the 31-member advisory board that plugged into the regional councils. But what was masterful about it is you put money on the table in a fund called the MSOF. And when you put money on the table and gave representation on that board, you forced them to come to the table and identify gaps, seek opportunities, work together. And that's what made Maryland different than all the other states, and made all other states look at Maryland. How do you do that? So I would appeal to you, as you look at the needs, the gaps, the trauma centers, you have a system now. Adjust the system, put the money on the table, bring the people to the table, and have them identify their opportunities and gaps. I say this because what's at stake here, I mean, the money's the money. And state puts a lot of money in this. And is a leader in county government. Counties across Maryland, towns across Maryland put a lot of money to make sure that we can get a paramedic unit within 8 minutes, 90% of the time in people's house. Because we know that what plays out every night in every bedroom, living room, every establishment on the streets around the state, from Ocean City to Oakland, these guys out here are running these calls, right? Everyone's putting the money in, but the reason we can do it is the integrity of the system. So when hospitals and trauma center needs money, bring it to the system. Put the money on the table. It's masterful. Thank you for your time. I'll hand it off to the executive director.
Hi, good afternoon, and thanks for the opportunity, Madam Chair, Senators. I'm Dr. Ted Delbers, Executive Director for MEMS, the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, and I thought I would spend just a few minutes. I realize you have my written testimony, so I thought I'd emphasize in a few minutes how the system comes to bear. First of all, thank you to Madeline for a thoughtful review, and we're also grateful to our DBM analyst, Christina Jorge Tignon. As Clay mentioned, Maryland just celebrated its 50th anniversary of the EMS system. In 1992, the legislature created the MEMSOF, which provides the financial foundation, the footing for the EMS system as a whole. But the fabric of the EMS system is really the 20,000 men and women who are EMS clinicians, EMTs, paramedics, emergency medical responders, and such, who last year answered more than 1 million calls for help and transported more than 550,000 patients to Maryland's emergency departments. They do that using medical protocols that are promulgated by MEMS with a lot of subject matter expertise input. When they make decisions about where to take patients for the best possible care, they consider 9 in-state trauma centers, a pediatric trauma center, primary stroke centers, thrombectomy-capable stroke centers, 28 cardiac interventional centers, perinatal referral places, hand trauma center, an eye specialty center, and 2 in-state burn center. And MEMS designates those centers so that people suffering get the best possible care and the best experience the best possible outcome. When paramedics and EMTs need additional guidance beyond what protocols can provide, or they have complex decisions to make, they contact EMS base station physicians through the Emergency Medical Resource Center, which is based in Baltimore with satellites in Talbot and Allegheny counties. They handled more than 200,000 calls this year, linking people in the field with the expertise they need in the hospital. As part of that, MEMS continues to be in the middle of a multi-year communications system upgrade, transforming the system from old analog antiquated technology to modern digital technology. I'd like the subcommittee to be aware that along the way, sometimes the radio towers that we're hanging antennas on could be what's called remediated, additional structural support to bring it up to current code. There is a tower in Parole in Annapolis, the Annapolis Armory, which was found to need repairs beyond what would be considered remediation in the foundation of the tower. We're right now working with DBM and DGS to find the approximate $1 million that it'll take to repair the tower, regardless of whether we hang anything new on it. The tower needs to be fixed sometime in the foreseeable future. We're trying to make sure that money doesn't come from the MEMSOF. When EMS clinicians conclude their care of a patient, they record their experience, the encounter on the statewide uniform electronic patient care reporting system that is uploaded to CRISP. So when a patient encounters EMS as part of their healthcare, it becomes part of their permanent healthcare record. We're working hard with CRISP right now to ensure that EMS clinicians can access information about a patient that would be germane to their acute care, including things like the availability of advanced directives, stuff like that. And the ability to have a statewide reporting system means that we can use EMS data for community health surveillance, for things like response to opioid overdoses and such. And I guess that's what I want to say. Clearly, the MSOF manifests into making Maryland a leader among statewide EMS systems. We've paid close attention over the last several years as the looming insolvency has become more clear. We are incredibly grateful to the subcommittee and the committee for its help in infusing the MSOF with general funds, $25 million this current fiscal year to help it stay solvent and alleviate the emergency, if you will, the emergency in the emergency. But we're at a crossroads for sure. Thanks.
Thank you, Senators.
Thank you. And
Sure.
just while we have everybody in the room, I think I can speak for the entire Budget and Taxation Committee when I tell you how grateful we are for this system and appreciating that it is a system. It's not one piece that is going to save someone's life. It's the entire system together. And we're gonna have to look at it in terms of, we put a Band-Aid on it last year with 25 million. We need to find a long-term solution for the entire system, and that's what we're gonna spend the next 73 days working towards.
And we
We're
look
anxious to
forward-
help.
And we look forward to supporting anything you need to that end.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions for this panel before we change out? Okay. Thank you. I have Mr. Tagliafieri, Mr. Cox, who's my constituent. Good to see you. Mr. Smothers and Miss Snedeker. In whichever order you would like. Okay.
I know, right? Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senators. Ready to start when we're ready? Okay, real quick, for the record, my name is Michael Cox. I'm here in official capacity today as the Executive Director of the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, one of the components of this system that you just heard Chairman Stamp talk about. Each year, we train anywhere between 25 to 35,000 emergency responders here in the state of Maryland. Just last year, we logged in over 645,000 student hours and about 1,600 class deliveries across the state. We do deliver training from our own 6 facilities statewide. Nobody has to travel more than an hour, hour and a half in any part of the state to reach a full-fledged fire training facility. In addition to that, we also utilize the 12 municipal and county fire training centers across the state. So there's plenty of opportunity for all of our responders. As you heard Chairman Stamp say, and what I want to say is that we play an integral role in this group. All the training for all the EMTs, EMRs, paramedics recertification training, things like that, all come through Murphy and our facilities, and it's just one component of the system. As in my position, I get to travel around the country, and I can tell you that there is no better EMS system than what we have here in the state of Maryland. It is just absolutely phenomenal. So I'll leave you with this. Because of, in the sake of time, because of our statewide training and our certification system here, one of the examples of us being able to be the best of the best and handle anything that's really thrown at us is in the past 18 months apart, we've had, firefighter line of duty deaths that occurred up in Baltimore City. And on the days of the funerals for those individuals, Baltimore City Fire Department's actually put out of service. Folks from Ocean City, out in Oakland, Deep Creek, Southern Maryland, St. Mary's County, wherever, went up to Baltimore City and put that department in service. So you had EMTs, paramedics, firefighters, all up in a place, strange place to many of them, didn't know their way around, but it's because of the system that we have here. So I thank you all for your time and your support. Thanks.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman and Senators. My name is Eric Smothers. I'm the president of the Maryland State Firemen's Association. As you've heard from the Chairman's Stamp, this coalition of partners, we all work in unison together. Maryland has one of the best systems across the United States, if not the world. And my travels out of state, Pennsylvania, Virginia, West Virginia, Delaware, folks are trying to figure out how Maryland does it. And that's one of the questions that I am frequently asked with, how do you guys and gals back here in Maryland figure out how to make an EMS system work and work with a hospital coalition to get people to the right place the first time? And through the years with MSOF, we have been able to do that. The MSFA represents 363 volunteer fire departments across the state, over 20,000 firefighters, EMTs, and rescue squad men and women across the state. The funds and the mechanisms that MSOF provides through MIMS and MEFRI through testing and certification, as well as training, is very crucial to our needs here. And we're certainly quite aware of the financial difficulties that loom. But we'd ask that you would continue to make sure that our funding remains in place as we go forward. That certainly benefits our volunteers, particularly when We're in a crisis where we're seeing a dwindling in volunteers across the state of Maryland. This certainly helps with our recruitment and retention efforts. As we're completing a study here with House Bill 414 to try to maintain and keep what we have here, across the state. About 80 to 85% of our fire services are provided by our volunteers across the state. So we would just ask for your assistance as we continue to go forward.
Senator Cook.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, I was here in Annapolis when you had a service here, and my wife had a very good friend that was a part of that list. And I'm probably not the only person that can say this, but I know you're not just people that work out there, you're a family. And I've seen that firsthand. And first, I wish a lot of other groups, a lot of other people and politicians could learn from that.
Thank you.
Because family came first, even in the Bible. The family came first before the church. The family is number one. And if we could learn by that, I think we can go a long way. So I think your service is not just important, it's adamant. And if we could do more, I think we can achieve a lot. And I think our chairwoman said the right thing, that we need to work together through this. And if we can do some great things. And that's what we should be doing in the first place. So I want to thank you for your testimony.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Cox, before you leave, if you're the right person to pose this question to, obviously, Madeline did a wonderful job painting the picture of how close we are to insolvency as a whole, but it doesn't tell the whole picture, because thinking about the rising costs of everything, especially fire equipment, I know this from my own city and county. If you know, and I don't mean to put you in a hot seat, but the Amos Fund started in 1985. Has it always been at $15 million?
That would probably be a better question
Okay.
for the MSFA to answer.
Okay.
Yes, I believe so. Yes.
Certainly the purchasing power in 1985 is much different than it is today.
Much different. I mean, if you're looking at where the Amos funds go for fire apparatus, just here recently in the last 2 years, fire apparatus has gone up at least 20 to 25%. So that $1.1 million ladder truck is now nearly $2 million that volunteers have to come up with.
Something else I'd like us to all keep in mind. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Major Michael Tagliaferri. I'm the commander of the Maryland State Police Aviation Command. I would like to formally thank Madeline Miller for her comprehensive analysis, and the senators on this committee for your continued support to not only the Maryland State Police, but to our partners in the MAMSOF coalition. The Maryland State Police Aviation Command is extremely proud to be the leading public safety organization and essential statewide aviation services to the citizens of Maryland for the past 53 years. The department has submitted written testimony, which provides some background on our program and some of our mission statistics. In regards to the request for comment on page 3 of the analysis, the Maryland State Police closed fiscal year 23 by the deadline of August 11th, 2023, and returned all unexpended funds. After closeout, the General Accounting Division transferred $200,010 from Aviation's special fund account. MSP explained that the fiscal year 23 was closed, and this transaction would impact the balance of the account. The General Accounting Division advised the transfer was necessary and would continue with the posting. MSP's budget director has advised that the account will be reconciled during fiscal year 24 closeout to ensure that the account is once again balanced. Any further questions can be directed to our budget director for clarification. The Aviation Command, along with our partners, acknowledges the forecasted insolvency of MSOF. It's committed to working with our partners, the legislature, and the governor's office to find a long-term solution to the insolvency of MSOF. Our medically oriented mission, which includes the airborne delivery of emergency medical services, search and rescue, aerial extraction of injured patients, is a crucial piece of Maryland's EMS and trauma system. Without continued funding of MSoft, the programs of our partners will no longer be able to provide essential EMS services to the citizens of Maryland. In 2023, Aviation Command personnel safely flew nearly 2,000 patients to area trauma centers for extended care. Just last month, our EMS system was put to the ultimate test at the scene of a complex motor vehicle collision on Interstate 83 in Parkton. Just after 7 a.m., fire department personnel and EMS ground providers responded for an injured patient who ran off the roadway in a box truck and collided with a tree. The subject was trapped in the vehicle in critical condition with traumatic injuries. Fire and EMS ground providers trained and certified through programs and protocols established by MIMS and RFRI, utilizing apparatus funded in part by MSoft, work to free and treat the patient. Due to the severity of the patient's injuries, ground providers made a call to the Emergency Medical Resource Center staffed by MIMS personnel and the SysCom Helicopter Communication Center to request a helicopter to airlift the patient to a trauma center for life-saving care. While fire and EMS personnel worked to extract the patient, Trooper 1's helicopter based out of Martin State Airport launched and headed to the scene to prepare for a medevac. Simultaneously, Trooper 2 from Joint Base Andrews flew to the University of Maryland Shock Trauma Center to pick up the GO team, which is staffed with a trauma surgeon and nurse anesthetist, to be flown to the scene to provide an even higher level of care. While the fire department personnel continued to work on the extraction, Trooper 1's crew of paramedics, now on scene, administered 2 units of whole blood to the patient while still trapped. The trooper medics, in coordination with the GO team who arrived on the scene, provided patient care and stabilizing medication throughout the 2.5-hour extraction process. Once extricated, the patient was then flown by Trooper 1 with the GO team to shock trauma for further life-saving care. This call exemplifies the incredible teamwork by fire, EMS, MIMS, shock trauma, and the Aviation Command to effect a positive outcome for this patient. Without sustained funding of MSoft, patients like this would never make it to a trauma center in time to save lives. Thank you for the opportunity to speak before you today. Our partners from Shock Trauma, represented by Dr. Christy Snedeker, are also here to discuss the role of patient care in Maryland's EMS system.
Thank you, Major. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, Senators. Thank you so much for the opportunity today. It's really good to see you again. I know we've had the great fortune of hosting many of you in the Trauma Center this year to really feel what it is we do every day. And I'm extremely proud to be sitting here with my partners of the coalition that enables us to really care for our patients. For the record, my name is Christy Snedeker. I'm the Vice President of the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center. MSoft has been the cornerstone of the state's capability to provide every citizen a broad and uncompromised safety net. And as established by state law, the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center is the core element of the state's emergency medical services system and serves as the state's primary adult resource center for the treatment of trauma. And as such has unique operating and financial requirements that distinguish us from any other Maryland trauma center and are the basis of the state's operating support. Standby costs. Shock trauma is 24 hours, 7 days a week. When you need us, we are there. We have operating rooms, the trauma resuscitation room, nurses, surgeon, nurse anesthetist, that's a tricky one, always on standby. And that comes with a cost. For fiscal year 25, that cost is $9.7 million. Last year, you did something very special for us. The subcommittee infused a one-time grant, an additional $5 million, in addition to the $3.7 that we were awarded in the budget. As well as the $9.5 million that was allocated to the Maryland Trauma System for the centers to divide up. And out of that, the Trauma Center sees $1.2 million of that. And that helps us narrow the gap. But certainly you recognize that we continue to have unfunded mandates from the state, which, is something that places a burden on the Trauma Center to be able to do its job. We're extremely grateful that the governor has included $3.7 million in this state operating, supporting the shock trauma for fiscal year 25. And of note, that's 4% of the MSoft revenue. I do want to go back to that 1993 when MSoft was established. The Shock Trauma Center received 10% of the pie at that time. If we received 10% of the pie at this time, we would be closer to reaching that $9.7 million needed for standby. The additional cost that the trauma center has for mandates, it helps us do research that keeps us to be better and brighter and innovative. It helps us do our outreach and prevention programs that we're mandated to do. It helps us with training and education for the requirements, and it also helps to fund that GO team. The GO team that went out to assist our partners that day for a 30-year-old patient that made it to shock trauma, sustaining injuries of rib fractures, soft tissue injuries, lung injuries, intubation, stayed with us 20+ days. I'm happy to say that patient was discharged home to their family in the new year, has returned to clinic and is doing extremely well. That isn't something that we can achieve unless we have all of us here supported, and we appreciate all that has been done so far and recognize that we continue to have work to do. Thank you very much.
Without a doubt, this is what, when people think of government, this is what they think of. They dial 911, they want us to show up. And I'm just kind of looking at the numbers here. And I was trying to understand, and I apologize, I'm not on this subcommittee, so I haven't had this stuff ahead of time to review it. On page 9, I'm trying to look here. What is the dollar figure we're looking at this year? Is it 9? On page 9, in the yellow, I'm trying to fully understand what I'm looking at here. And I'm not necessarily directing it to you. It could be the analyst.
Sure. So the highlighted bar on page 9 shows potential general funds required to maintain the balance. In fiscal 2024, the DLS forecast doesn't anticipate there being additional general fund need, with caveats to that assumption. But beginning in fiscal 2026, the general fund support, if the legislature which wished to use general fund support rather than altering the revenue structure, would be 18.8 million, and that grows in the out years.
So if we change the registration fee and then let's say increase it by 18 million, then this zeroes this out for 26, correct?
Yes, that would how to interpret that. The DBM information presented on the last page of the document, I don't know the number off the top, does not show the gap as what general funds would be needed, but does show as a negative ending balance. So you could also look at that.
So they're at 16. They're two million less.
In fiscal 26. Yes.
Okay. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator Jennings. And again, this is one piece of the system. Dr. Delbridge mentioned the Trauma Physicians Fund and the other trauma centers that we also know we have a gap to fill in terms of meeting need. So this is just one piece of what we have to solve. Okay. That was all I had signed up. I recognize there's a lot more people here. Anybody else like to present? Okay, we appreciate you taking the time to be here. And again, this is just the beginning of the work we have ahead. 73-ish days to get this done, and we appreciate in advance your cooperation and you being so solutions oriented. Thank you all. And that concludes our hearing for today.